listening to the Mark Bradford Alchemy for Life podcast.
What's the framework of your life? Hey there. What's the framework of your life? It sounds like a big question, and it sounds like something that one would design. But instead, it's something we end up with, isn't it? So what do I mean by framework? I mean the metaphorical things that support your life, like a scaffolding, like a frame, like a skeleton. And you may think it's your job or your family or your friends or even your hobby, and in many cases that's true. However, the answer may surprise you. Your framework gets revealed typically when you have a crisis. It's not so much who comes running to your aid or to support you, but rather what you feel like migrating towards. You may have a crisis, and in an effort to get your bearings, all you want to do is that hobby you really like. If you could just do that thing, you'd sort out the rest. When someone suggests that you're avoiding the trauma, what you're actually doing is holding on to your framework while you get your bearings. That's really something to think about, isn't it? It's really something to ponder on for those people who have a hobby or a thing or a silly little task that they do that they seem to do a lot when they're going through a trauma or a crisis. And again, I'm not saying escaping into a world with no responsibility or turning to some sort of stimulus like alcohol or drugs or what have you. I'm talking about those things that we value in our lives that are just silly little things, but they mean so much to us in the times when we're tested. I mention this to you because we do have trauma and crisis in our lives, and sometimes we have change. Even the little things that disrupt a day in our life can tell us what our framework is, or in some cases, who it is. You may have had the proverbial friend that calls you when there's an issue and says, "I couldn't think of anyone else to call but you." That's really the best kind of romantic relationship to happen to be in as well. But it just means you're part of that framework and you're important. And again, it's not to take up your swords or even to take any action other than to continue to be part of it and not go away. If you're hearing the word stability when I'm saying framework and other things, you're right. There's a certain stability that people want, a consistency, a constant in their life. And sometimes that constant takes the form of crochet, or playing a video game, or cooking too much food, or just calling a friend that you know is going to answer the phone. Sometimes you call them, sometimes you're that friend. The takeaway here is that it may be beneficial to understand what your framework is right now. So think about this. When your world is turned upside down, what do you want? Or who do you want? And understanding that you're part of someone else's framework can make all the difference in the world. If you've heard my podcast on resiliency, you may see some similarities, and there are. And just as a refresher, the podcast was called Resilience is a System. And I talked about how being a resilient person typically is because you are part of a webwork of other people who help you to be resilient. Being resilient alone is difficult, if not impossible sometimes. You need people around you in sort of a webwork that help support you in ways that are difficult to measure sometimes. And so that lends us to this framework that I'm talking about. It's a little bit different because it has to do with resiliency versus the framework of your life, that thing that you move through, the thing that you hang on to as if you have, like, not so much a suit of armor, but rather just this your ski poles to get you through things, the things that help you to navigate, the things that you know you can grab onto and you look down and they're still in your hands. It's those things that may or may not be tangible in your life. And you know me, I like talking about tangibles, but when it comes to the framework, some of those things aren't so tangible. And the danger is that other people can't see them. And the danger is that other people don't understand the value to you. And it's really easy to be convinced that it's not so valuable. But whatever's valuable to you is valuable. And, you know, it goes back to having intrinsic value versus perceived value. Well, in our wonderful world of our mind, perceived value and intrinsic are the same thing. We imbibe something with value by thinking it has value. And that also lends to my book on status, the Status Game 2. So if you really want to expand on that concept where we give value and power to something and then suddenly it has value and power to us, that's covered in depth in the Status Game 2. So again, in summary, understand that you have a framework in your life. Understand that the framework is built on things that you built. And sometimes nature and nurture helps or hinders you in building this as well. And that it may be silly to you, but it's not a silly thing. It's a thing that has value. So that's good enough for you. It's good enough for me. All right? Take care of yourself. Hey there. Thanks for listening. You know I always appreciate your feedback, right? Well, here's your chance. You can connect with me on Instagram, via the Alchemy for Life site, or most other social media. If you like this podcast, you may love my new book, Alchemy for Life: Formulas for Success. The 239-page paperback is available on Amazon and everywhere else you get your books. All this info is available at Alchemy for Life. Thank you. See you next week.